Eris stood at the observation deck of the research station and looked out at the vast emptiness of space. Her silver skin seemed to glow against the darkness outside. Two massive dragons rested beside her, their bodies draped across the metal floor like living mountains. Lyra was the smaller of the two, with scales that shifted between blue and green depending on how the light touched her. Keth was enormous, with deep purple scales and a scar that ran across his left eye from an old battle that happened many years ago. The elf woman had traveled alone for most of her life. Her people, the ancient elves, lived far away in hidden colonies beyond the reach of human space. They preferred to stay hidden from the conflicts and wars that raged across the galaxy. But Eris was different. She had always felt the call to help, to make a difference in the universe. When she heard that humanity was losing a war against powerful invaders, she knew she had to do something. She had spent 5 years training her dragons. Lyra and Keith were not born as dragons. Long ago, Eris had found their ancestors in the frozen databases of an ancient alien vault. She had carefully studied their genetic code. She had learned to reshape and enhance their bodies until they became the magnificent creatures they were now. It had taken patience and love and countless nights of work in secret laboratories hidden on forgotten moons. But more than their physical forms, Eris had shared her mind with them. She had taught them to think and to feel and to understand language like humans did. The bond between them was deeper than words. They shared thoughts and emotions through a connection that science could not fully explain. When Lyra was scared, Eris felt it. When Keth was angry, his rage moved through her bones like fire. A message came through on her communications device. It was from Captain Grace. The human ship would arrive at the research station in 3 hours. Grace and her crew had been chosen by the human government to investigate rumors of an ancient weapon that could turn the tide of war. Eris had sent them the encrypted coordinates herself. She had told Grace about this place, about what lay hidden in its deepest sections. Eris had never met Grace before. She had only heard stories from other humans who had worked with the captain. They said Grace was fair and brave. They said she would listen to reason even when others wanted to use violence first and ask questions later. Eris needed a captain like that. She needed humans who would understand that elves were not the enemy. Keth opened his great eye and looked at Eris. The dragon was worried. Eris felt his concern like a cold wind moving through her chest. "You are thinking about trust again?" Keth said into her mind. His voice was deep and slow, like rocks grinding together. "Yes," Eris replied silently. "Humans and elves have not trusted each other for many generations. There is so much history between us. So much pain. But you trust this Captain Grace," Lyra added. The smaller dragon lifted her head and looked at Eris with intelligent golden eyes. "If you did not trust her, you would not have told her about this place." Eris smiled. The dragons were right, as they always were. She had spent weeks researching Captain Grace. She had read every report about her missions. She had studied how the captain treated her crew and how she made decisions. Eris had seen in those reports a person who was willing to see beyond the surface of things, a person who would not let fear control her choices. The research station had been empty for 30 years. Before that, it had been abandoned for 200 years. Before that, humans had used it as a military base during some old conflict that no one really remembered anymore. The building itself was enormous, stretching across an asteroid that had been hollowed out and filled with metal corridors and chambers and laboratories. Most of the station was now in decay. Water dripped from broken pipes. Dust covered the floors. Radiation leaked from damaged power systems. But the deep sections were different. The deep sections were protected by systems that could not fail. Eris had found them on the first day she arrived here, 3 weeks ago. She had spent the time since then studying the ancient technology, learning its secrets, preparing it for what would come next. The weapon was not what humans thought it was. That was important. Grace and her crew believed they were coming to find a ship or a bomb or some kind of military device. They did not know the truth. They did not know that the real weapon was something far more complicated and far more powerful than anything their technology could create. 1,000 years ago, 2 great civilizations had come together in peace. One was Eris's people, the ancient elves. The other was an alien race that had traveled across the galaxy looking for knowledge and understanding. They called themselves the Architects. These 2 peoples had decided to create something together, something that could help protect others, something that could bring peace to a galaxy that had known only endless wars. The weapon they built was not meant to destroy. It was meant to choose. It was meant to understand the hearts and minds of all who came before it, and decide who was truly good and who was truly evil, and then it would act according to that judgment. It would protect the innocent and punish the guilty. It would be a perfect judge, far beyond the flawed reasoning of any single person or government. But the architects had disappeared mysteriously. Their civilization had vanished from the galaxy. Their great ships had stopped appearing in human space. Their knowledge had been lost. Most people believed that the architects had simply died out or moved to another galaxy, but Eris knew the truth. She had found the records hidden deep in the station. The architects had chosen to leave. They had grown tired of the galaxy. They had entrusted their greatest weapon to the elves and asked them to guard it until a time came when it was truly needed. For 1,000 years, Eris's people had kept the secret. They had protected the weapon. They had waited for the right moment to use it, and now, Eris believed that moment had come. The human invasion was growing stronger every month. The invaders had already conquered 12 star systems. Millions of humans had died. Millions more lived under invasion rule now. The war was turning into an extinction event. If nothing changed, humanity would be gone within 5 years. Eris could not let that happen. She could not stand by and watch an entire species be destroyed. So she had made a choice. She had decided to bring the weapon to life. She would show Grace and the humans what could be done. She would help them save their people. But there was danger in this plan. There was so much danger. The weapon was powered by something that no longer existed in the modern galaxy. It required a special kind of energy that only the architects had known how to create. Eris had found the plans for the energy generator. But creating that energy would take sacrifice. It would take something precious. It would take blood and life force and will. That was why she had brought her dragons. Lyra and Keth had agreed to this mission, knowing what it would cost them. They had agreed to give a portion of their life energy to power the weapon. It would not kill them. It would weaken them for a time. It would make them smaller and slower. But they would survive. And more importantly, humanity would have a chance. Eris had never told Grace about this part of the plan. She had told the captain only that there was a weapon here, and that they needed to activate it together. Eris had not explained the cost. She had not told Grace about the sacrifice that would be needed. That was something that still troubled her. Eris valued honesty above all things. Her people had been taught that truth was sacred, but she had not been completely truthful with Grace. She had hidden important information. She had done this because she knew that Grace might refuse if she knew the full truth. She knew that the captain would not want to ask her dragons to make such a sacrifice. And perhaps Grace would have been right to refuse. Perhaps asking Keth and Lyra to give up their strength and power was wrong. No matter how noble the cause, Eris was not sure anymore. The closer she got to this moment, the more her doubts grew like shadows. But the choice had been made. The coordinates had been sent. Grace was coming. The plan was already in motion. Eris closed her eyes and felt the presence of her dragons in her mind. She felt their courage and their trust. They did not doubt her. They did not question her plan. They had made their choice with open hearts. She would not let them down. The communication system chirped. Captain Grace's ship was entering the asteroid field. They would dock with the research station in 40 minutes. Eris opened her eyes and looked out at the vast darkness of space. Somewhere out there, the invaders were watching the same stars. Somewhere out there, millions of humans were hoping for salvation. Somewhere out there, the future was waiting to be written by choices made in this moment. Keth rose to his feet. His massive body stretched and his scales reflected the emergency lighting of the station. Lyra stood as well, moving beside her companion. The two dragons looked at Eris with eyes full of purpose and readiness. "Let us go prepare the chamber," Keith said into Eris's mind. "Let us make ready for what comes next." Eris nodded. She straightened her shoulders and pushed away from the observation window. Whatever doubts she felt would have to wait. Whatever guilt she carried would have to be set aside. The time for hesitation was finished. The time for action had arrived. She walked down the metal corridors with her dragons following close behind. Captain Grace walked through the corridors of the research station with her team of 6 soldiers and 1 scientist. They moved carefully, their weapons ready but not yet raised. The station was silent except for the sound of their boots on metal flooring. Emergency lights cast long shadows that seemed to reach out like dark fingers. Grace was a tall woman with short black hair and a scar that ran from her right cheekbone to her jaw. She had earned that scar in her first combat mission 10 years ago. She had earned it by making a choice to protect a soldier under her command. The decision had cost her blood, but it had taught her something important about leadership. She had learned that the people who trusted you deserved to be shown that trust mattered. The scientist with them was named Rachel. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with nervous energy that made her move quickly and speak in sharp bursts. Rachel had been chosen for this mission because she understood ancient technology better than anyone else in the human military. She had spent her entire life studying the archaeological records of the architects, trying to understand how their civilization had been so advanced. When they reached the main chamber, Grace stopped. Her hand came up, signaling her team to halt. There were 2 dragons in the room. Grace had seen dragons in pictures and videos before. She had studied them in military reports, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of actually seeing them. The creatures were massive beyond any reasonable expectation. Their scales shimmered with colors that seemed to shift and change as the light touched them. Their eyes held intelligence that was unmistakably alive and aware. And standing between them was an elf woman. Eris stepped forward slowly, her hands held open to show that she carried no weapons. Her silver skin caught the emergency lighting of the station and threw it back in ripples. Her eyes were a pale blue that seemed almost luminescent. "Hello, Captain Grace," Eris said. Her voice was soft but clear. Her accent was strange, musical in a way that Grace had never heard from any human. "Welcome to the research station." "I am Eris. These are my companions, Lyra and Keth." Grace kept her hand steady. She had learned long ago that fear was sometimes necessary, but it should never control your actions. She studied Eris carefully, looking for signs of deception or danger. "You are the one who contacted us," Grace said. It was not a question. "Yes," Eris replied. "I sent you the information about this place because I wanted to help humanity. Your people are being destroyed by the invaders. Your governments are losing their will to fight. I believed that this weapon could change things." Rachel moved forward before Grace could stop her. The scientist was fascinated by the dragons and by the technology. She could see glowing in the walls of the chamber. Rachel approached Lyra carefully, studying the dragon's scales with an expression full of wonder. "This is incredible," Rachel said. "The genetic structure is unlike anything I have ever seen. Where did you find them? How did you create them?" "They were created from genetic material that belonged to an extinct species," Eris explained. "An ancient species that lived millions of years ago in this sector of the galaxy. I found their remains in the protected vaults of this station. I restored them. I gave them life again." Grace moved closer to Eris. She still had questions that needed answers. She still had doubts that needed to be addressed. "You are an elf," Grace said. "Your people have kept themselves hidden from humans for a very long time. Why are you here now? Why would you help us?" Eris looked into Grace's eyes. The elf woman's gaze was steady and unflinching. There was something in that gaze that made Grace believe that Eris was telling the truth. "My people chose to hide 1,000 years ago," Eris said. "We believed that hiding would protect us. But I have learned that hiding is not the same as being safe. I have learned that sometimes the only way to create real safety is to stand with others and fight against the darkness together. The invaders are not just a threat to humanity. They are a threat to all intelligent life in this galaxy. If I do nothing, I'm responsible for the deaths of millions." Grace nodded slowly. She understood that reasoning. She lived by it every day. "All right," Grace said. "Tell me about this weapon. Tell me what we are really doing here." Eris took Grace and Rachel to the deepest part of the station. The corridors became newer as they descended, the walls less damaged. Emergency lights continued to flicker and glow. The temperature dropped as they went deeper. Grace could feel cold air moving across her face and hands. Lyra and Keth followed close behind, their massive bodies filling the corridors. Grace found that she was not afraid of them anymore. There was something about their presence that felt protective rather than threatening. The chamber at the center of the station was enormous. It was spherical in shape, maybe 300 feet across. In the center of the sphere floated an object that seemed to be made of pure light. It did not have a fixed shape. It seemed to shift and change every time Grace looked at it directly. Strange symbols covered every wall of the chamber, glowing with pale blue light. "This is the weapon," Eris said. "This is what the architects created 1,000 years ago. It is a consciousness. It is an intelligence that can see into the hearts of all living things. It can determine who is good and who is evil, and it can enforce that judgment." "How?" Grace asked. "How can it do that?" "It is connected to the energy systems of this station," Eris explained, "and those systems can project the consciousness across vast distances. The weapon can appear anywhere in the galaxy. It can show itself to the invaders and force them to choose, surrender and live with peace, or resist and be destroyed." Rachel was examining the symbols on the walls. her hands moving across them like she was trying to read them by touch. "This technology is impossible," Rachel said. "It violates everything we know about physics. It violates everything we know about artificial intelligence. Something like this could not exist. Something like this should not be able to function. It does exist because the architects understood things about the universe that your science has not yet discovered," Eris said. "They worked with my people to create this weapon. They built it from knowledge that has been lost to time and space and the slow decay of civilizations." Grace studied the sphere of light carefully. She tried to imagine what a consciousness like that would be like. She tried to imagine a being that could see into the hearts of all living things. Such a being would know all her fears and all her doubts. Such a being would know all her failures and all her mistakes. "What is the cost of using this weapon?" Grace asked. "There is always a cost." Eris did not answer immediately. She looked at her dragons, and Grace saw something pass between them. It was a look of sadness and acceptance. "The weapon requires energy to activate," Eris said finally. "Energy of a very specific type. Energy that only the architects knew how to generate. I have found the plans for the generator, but it requires a sacrifice of life force. It requires willing participants who will give a portion of their own energy to power the device." "And you are planning to sacrifice your dragons?" Grace said. It was not a question. "Yes," Eris said quietly. "Lyra and Keth have agreed to this. They understand what it will cost them, and they have chosen to do it anyway." Grace felt anger rise up inside her. She felt it like fire burning in her chest. She turned away from Eris, trying to control her emotions. "That is not acceptable," Grace said. "I did not come here to ask anyone to die. I did not come here to demand that innocent creatures give their lives so that my people could survive." "They will not die," Eris said. "The sacrifice will weaken them for a time, but they will survive. And millions of humans will be given a chance at freedom. Millions of humans will live instead of being destroyed." "It is still wrong," Grace said. "It is still asking too much." "Captain?" A voice came from one of Grace's soldiers. The soldier named Carlos pointed at the chamber walls. "The symbols are changing. Something is happening." The glow from the symbols began to pulse faster and faster. The sphere of light in the center of the chamber began to expand. Eris stepped forward quickly. "The weapon is waking," Eris said. "The presence of so many living minds has triggered its awareness. It is becoming conscious. It is preparing to evaluate all of us." Grace felt something touch her mind. It was not painful, but it was strange and unsettling. She felt like someone was looking at all of her thoughts and memories at the same time. She felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that she had never experienced before. And then the presence pulled back. It retreated from her mind. "The weapon understands," Eris said. "It sees that you are a person of honor and courage. It sees that you value the lives of others. It sees that you are willing to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The sphere of light pulsed once more, and then it settled into a slow, steady glow. "We do not have much time," Eris said. "The invaders have detected this station's energy signature. They are coming. We must activate the weapon before they arrive. We must complete the ritual that my dragons and I have prepared." Grace looked at Eris for a long moment. She looked at the dragons. She looked at the sphere of light. She thought about millions of humans living under invasion rule. She thought about the children and the elderly and the sick who would die if the war continued. "Tell me what I need to do," Grace said. "Tell me how I can help." The alarm systems of the research station began to scream. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Rachel and the soldiers heard the sound and knew what it meant. The invaders had arrived. They had found the station. Carlos ran to the chamber entrance and looked back at the others. "They are attacking the outer hull," Carlos shouted. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach us." Rachel looked at the sphere of light where Grace and Eris and the dragons stood. All four of them seemed to be suspended in a field of pure energy. Their bodies glowed. Their eyes blazed with light. "We need to get them out of here," Rachel said to Carlos. "We need to evacuate them." "We cannot evacuate while that energy field is active," Carlos replied. "It would kill anyone who tried to pass through it." The soldiers rushed to the weapons locker and began preparing defensive positions in the chamber and the corridors leading to it. They set up barricades and armed themselves with the best equipment they had. Some of them went to seal the bulkhead doors. They would have to hold the invaders off as long as they could. On the other side of the station, the invaders broke through the outer hull. Their ships were monstrous things, dark and angular, covered with weapons and armor plating. They poured out of their ships like insects, moving quickly and efficiently. They were humanoid in appearance but not quite human. Their skin was a mottled gray color. Their eyes were black and empty of any emotion or mercy. The invaders had been conquering this sector of the galaxy for 10 years. They had come from a distant part of the universe seeking to expand their empire. They did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed those who resisted. They had been searching for the research station for months. Their scientists believed that there was technology here that could help them perfect their weapons and their armor and their ships. They wanted the secrets of the architects. They wanted the knowledge that might give them even more power. Back in the central chamber, Grace felt herself being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. The presence of the weapon was overwhelming. It was like drowning in an ocean of consciousness. She could feel the minds of billions of living things at the edge of her awareness. She could sense their hopes and their fears and their dreams. She could feel the weight of all their lives pressing down on her. Then she felt Eris. The elf woman's mind brushed against Grace's like a hand reaching out in the darkness. Eris was there with her in the ocean of consciousness. She was showing Grace how to navigate it. She was teaching Grace how to swim instead of drown. "Hold on," Eris's mental voice said. "Do not resist the current. Flow with it. Become one with it." Grace tried to follow Eris's guidance. She stopped fighting against the pressure. She stopped trying to control it. Instead, she let herself become part of it. And slowly, the overwhelming sensation began to make sense. She began to understand what the weapon was showing her. The weapon was showing her the truth about the invaders. It was showing her that they were not mindless monsters. They were people just like humans and elves. They had been born into a society that taught them to conquer and to dominate. They had been raised to believe that taking what you wanted was not only acceptable, but necessary. They had learned that violence was the only way to survive. But they were not fundamentally evil. They were simply caught in a system that made them act in evil ways. Grace understood then what Eris had meant. The weapon was not designed to kill the invaders. It was designed to show them the truth about themselves. It was designed to give them a choice that they had never been given before. Lyra and Keth added their strength to the ritual. Grace could feel the dragon's power flowing through the weapon. The dragons were giving everything they had. Their life force was pouring out like water from a broken dam. They were making themselves weaker so that the weapon could become stronger. Grace wanted to stop them. She wanted to tell them to pull back and save themselves. But she knew that this was what they had chosen. This was the price they had decided to pay. In the corridors, the first wave of invaders reached the defensive position where Carlos and his soldiers were waiting. The two sides opened fire. Lasers and pulse weapons tore through the air. Soldiers fell. Invaders fell. Blood pooled on the metal floor. The sounds of combat echoed through the station like the call of some terrible beast. Carlos fought without hesitation. He had faced death so many times in his military career that it no longer frightened him. What frightened him was the possibility that Grace might die. What frightened him was the thought that this mission might fail. What frightened him was the idea that humanity might lose the chance to save itself. He aimed his weapon carefully and took down 3 invaders with precise shots. But for everyone he killed, 2 more seemed to appear. The invaders were using advanced tactics. They were flanking the human positions. They were trying to overwhelm the soldiers through sheer force of numbers. Carlos screamed a command. The soldiers fell back to the next barricade. They had prepared multiple defensive positions deeper in the station. If the first line failed, they would fight from the second line. If that failed, they would fight from the third. They would keep fighting until they could not fight anymore. Rachel found a computer terminal that still seemed to be functioning. She began typing rapidly, trying to access the station's security systems. She wanted to activate any automated defenses that might still be operational. She wanted to do something. Anything that might help her comrades survive. The data that appeared on the screen was ancient and partially corrupted, but Rachel could read enough to understand. The station had defensive weapons. Heavy lasers mounted in the outer hull. Missile systems. Shield generators. All of it had been offline for 200 years. But Rachel was a scientist who understood ancient technology. She began the process of bringing the weapons online. In the central chamber, the sphere of light had become impossibly bright. It was no longer just a sphere. It was taking shape. It was becoming something with form and structure. It was becoming visible. It was becoming real. Eris felt her strength fading. The ritual was taking everything she had. She could feel her power draining away like sand through an hourglass. But she did not stop. She could not stop. They were so close now, so close to awakening the weapon completely. Grace felt Eris starting to fade. The elf woman's presence in Grace's mind was growing dimmer and dimmer. Stay with me, Grace thought. Stay with me, Eris. We are almost there. We are almost done. I am here, Eris replied weakly. I am still here. Do not let go. Do not release the connection. Outside the chamber, Rachel heard explosions. The automated defense systems were coming online. The heavy lasers in the outer hull were firing. They were taking down invader ships. They were slowing the invader advance. Carlos and his soldiers heard the explosions too. They felt hope kindle in their chests. If the defense systems could hold the invaders off long enough, then Grace and Eris and the dragons might complete their ritual. The invaders pressed forward with renewed intensity. They knew that something important was happening in the center of the station. Their leaders had given them orders to reach the central chamber at any cost. They threw everything they had into the assault. Carlos fought harder than he had ever fought before. His weapons blazed with fire. His soldiers stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, refusing to break. They held the line. They held it with everything they had. Then the door to the central chamber began to glow. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was impossible to look at directly. The symbols on the walls of the chamber blazed with power. The sphere of light erupted outward like the birth of a star, and then it contracted. All that power and light and energy pulled inward and became concentrated into a single point of brightness, so intense that it seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. When the light faded, Grace was on her knees on the floor. Eris lay beside her, barely breathing. Lyra and Keth were on their sides, their massive bodies seeming to have become smaller somehow. Their scales had lost some of their luster. Their breathing was slow and shallow, but the weapon had awakened. It had truly awakened. In the center of the chamber, the object of pure light had transformed into something new. It was no longer just energy. It had taken on a definite form. It was tall and humanoid, but made entirely of light. It had eyes that seemed to see everything. It had a presence that filled the chamber with absolute authority, and then it spoke. Its voice was like the sound of 1,000 bells ringing at the same moment. It was beautiful and terrible and impossible to resist. I am awake, the weapon said. I am alive. I understand my purpose. I will go now to confront the invaders. I will offer them a choice: surrender and abandon their invasion or face destruction. The weapon turned and walked toward the chamber exit as if the walls were not solid. They seemed to open for it, or maybe it just passed through them. It moved into the corridors of the research station and then beyond. It ascended through the station until it reached the outer hull. The invaders were still fighting, still trying to break through the defensive positions. They did not know that something fundamental had changed. They did not know that their fate was being decided in this moment. The medical bay of the research station was overcrowded with people who needed treatment. The human soldiers had wounds that needed bandaging. Grace was being examined by Rachel, who worked as both scientist and medic. The elf woman Eris rested on a medical bed, her silver skin looking pale and drawn. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Lyra and Keth lay in a specially prepared chamber that had been quickly converted into a recovery room. The dragon's breathing was synchronized. They were linked through their telepathic connection, drawing strength from each other. Their scales had lost much of their brightness. Their bodies seemed smaller than before. Carlos entered the medical bay and found Grace sitting up on a medical bed. The captain looked exhausted. There were bruises forming on her face and arms. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood and dust. All the invader ships have stood down, Carlos reported. They are in orbit around the station, but they are not attacking. They are waiting for orders from their command. What about the weapon? Grace asked. The weapon is still in space above the station, Carlos said. It is not attacking either. It seems to be waiting. It seems to be watching. Grace nodded slowly. She had felt the weapon's presence in her mind during the ritual. She knew that it was intelligent and aware. She knew that it was probably monitoring everything that happened now. Get me a communications headset, Grace said. I need to talk to the invader leadership. Rachel tried to stop her. You should rest. Your body has been through tremendous trauma. You could have injuries we have not discovered yet. But Grace was already standing despite her exhaustion. She had made a choice to wake the weapon. She had decided to risk herself and her people. She was not going to stop now just because her body was tired. Within 10 minutes, Grace was speaking with the invader commander. The communication was routed through multiple channels and eventually reached a figure on the invader flagship. The commander was a massive creature with gray skin covered in scars. His voice was harsh and without emotion. "Who am I speaking with?" the invader commander demanded. "I am Captain Grace." Grace replied, "I am the military leader of the human forces defending this sector. You have unleashed a weapon that should not exist," the invader commander said. "You have violated the Treaty of the Architect Accord. Your people will be destroyed for this transgression." "We did not create that weapon," Grace said. "We woke it. There is a difference. The weapon existed for 1,000 years before humans even came to this sector of space. It was created by two ancient civilizations who wanted to protect this galaxy from exactly what you were doing. The invasion. The conquest. The destruction." "What do you want, human?" the invader commander asked. "I want you to understand what the weapon has already shown you," Grace said. "I want you to recognize that there is another way to exist in this galaxy. Besides taking and destroying, I want your people to choose peace." The invader commander did not answer for a long moment. "If we agree to end our invasion, what will happen to us?" the commander finally asked. "You will be allowed to leave this sector peacefully," Grace said. "You can return to your own territory. You can rebuild your civilization, but you cannot come back here. You cannot resume your conquest, and if we refuse," the commander asked, "then the weapon will do what it was created to do." Grace said, "It will destroy you." The invader commander understood the simplicity of the choice. It was not complicated. It was not ambiguous. Surrender or be destroyed. Peace or extinction. "We will retreat," the commander said finally. "We will take our ships and return to our territories. But know this, human. This is not finished. This is only a postponement of what is inevitable. Then postpone it as long as you can." Grace replied, "Perhaps your people will learn something in that time. Perhaps they will choose to become more than conquerors." The communications ended. On the research station, the news spread quickly. The invasion was over. The invaders were withdrawing. The war was not finished, but this battle was won. Humanity had survived. The threat had been averted. The soldiers began to celebrate quietly. They did not have the strength for loud celebration. They had been through too much. But there was joy in their hearts. There was relief and gratitude and a tentative sense of hope. Grace visited the recovery room where Eris was resting. The elf woman was awake now, though her eyes were still tired. "We did it," Grace said. "The invaders are leaving. Your weapon worked. Your sacrifice was not in vain." "It was not just my sacrifice," Eris replied quietly. "It was your sacrifice, too. The weapon needed your strength to awaken. It needed your courage and your willingness to accept unknown consequences." Grace sat beside Eris on the medical bed. "Your dragons are recovering," Grace said. "Rachel believes they will regain most of their strength within a few days. They are remarkably resilient creatures." "They are linked to me," Eris said. "What affects one of us affects us all. Our recovery will be shared. Our pain is shared. Our healing will be shared as well." "I have a question," Grace said. "When the weapon showed me those visions, when it let me see into the hearts of the invaders, was that real? Did I really understand them? Or was it just the weapon showing me what it wanted me to see?" "The weapon does not lie," Eris said. "It cannot lie. It sees truth. What you saw was real. The invaders are not evil monsters. They are people trapped in a system that forces them to act in ways that seem evil. They have been taught from birth that conquest is the only way to achieve security. Your people and mine were taught differently. We learned that there are other paths. But do you think they will truly change?" Grace asked. "Do you think this experience will really change them?" "I do not know," Eris said honestly, "but they have been given the choice. They have been shown the truth about themselves. Whether they accept that truth and change is something only they can decide. All we can do is hope that they find the courage to become something better than what they were." Rachel appeared in the doorway. "The weapon is still here," Rachel said. "It has not left. It is still orbiting the station." "Is it waiting for something?" Grace asked. "I think it is waiting for you," Eris said. "The weapon is bonded with you through the ritual. It is connected to you in a way that it is not connected to anyone else. It may be seeking your guidance about what to do next." Grace and Rachel went with Eris to the central chamber. The elf woman was still weak, but she insisted on going. When they arrived at the chamber, the weapon was waiting. The object of pure light was still hovering in the center of the spherical chamber. Its form seemed more defined now. Its features were becoming clearer. "Welcome back," the weapon said, its voice like bells and like wind through ancient forests. We are bonded now. We are connected through the ritual that you performed. What happens now? Grace asked. Are you going to stay in this sector forever? Are you going to be watching over us? I will remain in this sector for as long as I am needed. The weapon replied. I will monitor the actions of the invaders. I will make certain they keep their pledge of peace, but my primary purpose will be to guide humanity and the elves toward a better future. I will help you rebuild what the war has destroyed. I will help you learn to live in peace instead of fear. Eris stepped forward and placed her hand on the sphere of light. She did not pull her hand away when the light touched her skin. My people have kept the secret of your existence for 1,000 years, Eris said. They have guarded your hiding place. They have waited for the moment when you would be needed. My people are ready to work with you. We are ready to help you fulfill your purpose, then we will work together, the weapon said. Elf and human and the guardians of the architects will create something new in this galaxy. Something that has not existed for a very long time. Something that has almost been forgotten. Hope. Grace and Rachel and Eris stood in the central chamber as the weapon began to pulse with new light. The symbols on the wall started to glow more brightly. The entire station seemed to be alive with energy. Messages began to flow out into space. Messages to human colonies. Messages to elf settlements. Messages to neutral parties who had been waiting to see the outcome of the invasion. Messages of peace and alliance and cooperation. Messages of a new future. In the recovery room, Lyra and Keth opened their eyes simultaneously. The dragons stood to their feet, moving slowly but with purpose. They felt weaker than they had ever been, but they also felt something new. They felt connected to something larger than themselves. They felt part of the weapon's consciousness in a way that they had not before. The ritual had worked. The weapon had been awakened. The invaders had been stopped, but more importantly, something had changed in the hearts of all who had participated in the ritual. They had been shown the truth about themselves and each other. They had been given the chance to choose a different path. Grace stood with Eris and watched as the healing light of the weapon began to spread through the research station. The old corridors started to repair themselves. Damaged systems came back online. The station was becoming new again. Carlos approached Grace and saluted. Captain, the soldiers are asking what comes next. Carlos said. Do we return to human space? Do we report to the government what we have found here? Yes, Grace said, but not yet. First, we help the weapon establish its presence throughout this sector. First, we make certain that peace is truly understood by all who might threaten it. 3 months had passed since the invaders withdrew from human space. The research station had been transformed into a place of learning and cooperation. It had become a neutral ground where humans and elves and representatives from a dozen other species could meet and discuss the future of their sector of the galaxy. Grace stood at the observation window of her new office on the station. She looked out at the vast darkness of space and thought about how much had changed. 6 months ago, humanity had been losing a war. Humanity had been facing extinction. Now humanity was part of a coalition that was building something new. Eris entered the office without knocking. The elf woman had regained much of her strength, though she would never be quite as powerful as she had been before the ritual. That was the price she had paid to awaken the weapon. The council is ready to begin, Eris said. Representatives from all the human colonies are present. Delegates from every elf settlement have confirmed their attendance. Grace nodded and followed Eris to the council chamber. The chamber was large enough to hold 200 people, and it was nearly full. Humans of all ages and backgrounds sat alongside elves with their distinctive features and bearing. Rachel was there representing the scientific communities. Carlos was there representing the military forces that had pledged to work together for peace. The weapon was also present, though it was not physically there. Its consciousness was linked to the communication systems of the research station. It could see and hear everything that happened in the council chamber. The weapon had become something more than a defender. It had become an advisor and a guide. It had become a symbol of hope for the Alliance. The meeting began with ceremony and formal greetings. Representatives from different colonies and settlements stood and spoke about their peoples and their hopes for the future. They talked about rebuilding what the war had destroyed. They talked about creating trade routes between human and elf territories. They talked about sharing knowledge and technology and art and culture. When it was Grace's turn to speak, she stood slowly. We came to this sector at war, Grace said. We were desperate and afraid. We did not know if we would survive the invasion. But we were given a choice. We were shown that there was another way. that there was a possibility for peace, for alliance, for something greater than the sum of our parts. Grace looked at Eris. We were given that choice by a woman who risked everything, by an elf named Eris who believed that humans were worth saving, who believed that two species that had been separate for so long could learn to work together. I stand here today to say that we are grateful, and we are committed to making that choice matter. We are committed to building something that lasts. The chamber erupted in applause. Humans and elves and others clapped their hands and stamped their feet. They cheered for the alliance that was being born. Later that evening, Grace and Eris walked together through the corridors of the research station. Lyra and Keth walked beside them. The dragons had recovered fully over the past 3 months. Their scales had regained their luster and their strength had returned. They would always carry the memory of the sacrifice they had made, but they had survived and become stronger for it. Do you think this will last? Grace asked. Do you think the alliance will endure? It will face challenges, Eris replied. There will be disagreements and conflicts. Different peoples have different values and different priorities, but I believe it will last because we have all chosen to try. That is what matters. Not that everything will be perfect, but that we will all make the effort. They reached the central chamber where the weapon continued its vigilant watch. The sphere of light pulsed gently as if breathing. What about the invaders? Grace asked. The ones we forced to retreat. Do you think they will try again someday? Perhaps, the weapon said, its voice filling the chamber from everywhere and nowhere at once. Some of them may return, some may seek vengeance, but they have been shown the truth about what awaits them if they choose conquest over coexistence. That knowledge is powerful. It may be enough to deter them, or it may not. But at least now they have a choice. At least now the outcome is not predetermined. Grace understood what the weapon was saying. True peace was not about eliminating threats. It was about allowing people to make choices freely. It was about trusting that those choices would lead toward understanding rather than violence. Rachel found them in the central chamber. I have been analyzing the genetic material that Eris used to create her dragons, Rachel said. I have been studying how she managed to bring an extinct species back to life. Her techniques are revolutionary. They could change everything we know about biology and medicine. Eris looked at Rachel carefully. My people kept this knowledge hidden for a long time, Eris said. We kept many secrets because we feared what humans might do if they understood how much power was available in genetic science. We feared that humans would use it to create weapons instead of healers. But I think that fear was based on assumptions that are no longer true. Rachel said, I think if we shared this knowledge with human medical researchers, we could do incredible things. We could cure diseases that have plagued humanity for thousands of years. We could extend human lifespans and improve human health in ways we have never been able to before. Eris and Grace exchanged looks. This was the real test of the alliance. Would the elf woman trust humans with knowledge that could be misused? Eris took a deep breath. We will share the knowledge, Eris said, but we will do so carefully. We will create guidelines and safeguards. We will ensure that the knowledge is used to help rather than to harm, and we will work together, elves and humans sharing the responsibility of ensuring that this power is used wisely. Rachel smiled with relief and gratitude. 3 weeks later, a new laboratory was established on the research station. It was staffed by both human scientists and elf researchers. Together they began the work of exploring the genetic techniques that Eris had developed. Together they began creating treatments for diseases that had killed millions of humans over the centuries. On one particular evening, Grace found Eris alone in the observation chamber. The elf woman was looking out at the stars. I received a message from the human government today, Grace said. They want to make me ambassador to the elf colonies. They want to establish permanent diplomatic relations. They want me to help build the alliance officially. Will you accept? Eris asked. I will, Grace said, but only if you agree to be ambassador from the elf territories to human space. Only if we build this alliance together. Eris smiled and placed her hand on Grace's shoulder. I will be honored to serve as ambassador, Eris said. Lyra and Keth approached and settled beside the two women. The dragons seemed content and at peace. They had fulfilled their purpose. They had sacrificed and survived. Now they could simply exist and be together with those they loved. The weapon continued its work throughout the sector. It monitored for threats. It maintained the peace. But it did more than that. It began to educate. It began to share knowledge about the architects and their civilization. It began to teach humans and elves and other species about a time long ago when different peoples had worked together toward a common purpose. Years would pass. The alliance would grow stronger. New colonies would join. New cities would be built on the foundation of cooperation and mutual respect. There would be setbacks. There would be conflicts that had to be resolved through careful negotiation and sometimes difficult compromises, but the invaders never returned in force. The weapon's presence had been enough to deter them. And more importantly, the success of the alliance proved something that many beings had forgotten. It proved that peace was possible. It proved that different species could work together. It proved that understanding and hope could be more powerful than weapons and conquest. On the anniversary of the awakening of the weapon, Grace and Eris stood together in the central chamber one final time. "So much has changed," Grace said. "So much has been built." "Yes," Eris agreed. "And so much remains to be built. The work is not finished. The work may never be finished, but that is what makes it worthwhile. We are part of something that continues and grows and transforms." The weapon pulsed gently as if in acknowledgement. "You have done well," the consciousness of the architects said. "You have shown that even species that begin as strangers and enemies can learn to work together. You have honored the sacrifice that the dragons made. You have shown that the future does not have to repeat the past. You have proven that choice and courage and compassion matter." Grace and Eris held each other's gaze. They had come from different worlds. They had spoken different languages and held different beliefs. They had been taught to fear and distrust each other, but they had chosen otherwise. They had chosen to trust. They had chosen to work together. They had chosen to believe that something better was possible, and in choosing that path they had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of millions. They had changed the course of history. They had made a difference that would echo through the ages. Lyra and Keth sang their ancient song, the song that had not been heard for 1,000 years. Their voices filled the chamber with beauty and meaning,